What if I told you their debut album was recorded in just 2 days, after a disaster wiped out an entire week of work? That 1 in every 40 Canadians owned the same record? That Ra McGuire described his own platinum awards as menacing, not rewarding. 6 hit albums, a nation's soundtrack. But the brotherhood that built it all quietly walked away, then handed the name to strangers. Stick around. This is the rise and fall of Trooper. Vancouver, British Columbia. The early 1970s. If you wanted to make it in rock and roll, really make it, this was not the obvious place to start. The music industry infrastructure that existed in Los Angeles or New York was essentially non-existent on the west coast of Canada. There were no major label scouts hanging around the clubs, no guaranteed pipeline to radio play. There was just the dream, the work, and the hope that somebody, somewhere, would eventually listen. It was in this environment that a young Ra McGuire and Brian Smith first started playing together in the mid-1960s. Smith had been born in London, England, and brought a British sensibility to the West Coast music scene. McGuire was the lyrical voice, the one who could put words to feelings that didn't have names yet. Together, they played around the Vancouver area in a band called Winter's Green, playing to whoever showed up and making just enough to keep the lights on. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The lounge circuit was not glamorous. It was brutal. 5 or 6 nights a week. 3 or 4 sets a night. But every great band has a crucible. And for McGuire and Smith, those small venues were the forge that shaped everything they would become. You don't get 6 platinum records without first learning how to hold an audience's attention when they'd rather be talking to the person next to them at the bar. By 1972, the duo expanded into a full band, adding drummer Tommy Stewart and bass player Harry Kalensky, and rechristened themselves Applejack. The mission was straightforward: to be heard. To play original music in a country with precious little infrastructure for turning local rock bands into national names. They loaded into vans and ground through the Western Canadian touring circuit, small clubs, university venues, roadhouses between one nowhere and the next. Their home base during these years was the Royal Towers Hotel Basement Pub in New Westminster. Night after night, they tested original material against the top 40 covers required to keep the crowd moving. It was in those relentless, thankless sets that the foundational ideas for future anthems were first played. Then came the break they'd been grinding toward for years. Randy Bachman, the guitar architect behind the Guess Who and Bachman-Turner Overdrive, had launched his own label. Alerted by local agent Sam Feldman, Bachman came down to the Royal Towers one afternoon to watch Applejack rehearse. He didn't just watch once. He stayed for an entire week, observing the work ethic, listening to the songs, gauging what these men were made of before committing to anything. What he found convinced him. He signed them, and the name changed one final time. McGuire explained it himself. Trooper was a play on the old vaudeville term trooper, meaning a performer who keeps going even when the roof is falling in. It was exactly the right name for a band that had already proven it could survive anything. With Randy Bachman in their corner, Trooper entered K. Smith Studios in Seattle in 1975 to record their self-titled debut album. And almost immediately, disaster struck. A technician misaligned the tape heads. An entire week's worth of recorded tracks was destroyed, gone, just like that. For a lesser band, for men who hadn't spent the previous decade grinding through basement bars and 3-set nights, that might have been the end. But Trooper was not a lesser band. Bachman made a decision. He told them to set up and play the entire album straight through, live off the floor, front to back, no stops. By their own account, they cut and mixed the whole record in just 2 days. The resulting album had a rawness, a live wire energy no amount of studio time could manufacture. Songs like Baby Wantcha, Please Come Home, and General Hand Grenade established Trooper as a rising force on the Canadian charts. The bar band had arrived. As the 1970s rolled forward, the band's sound evolved. The addition of keyboardist Frank Ludwig in 1976 transformed their sonic palette, allowing Brian Smith's guitar work to step into a sharper, more focused lead role. Their second album, Two for the Show, became their first gold record, featuring Santa Maria, a song inspired by a boat trip and an anthemic title track that felt tailor-made for hockey arenas across the country.
So have a good time, the sun can shine.
Then came the albums that turned them from a promising act into a cultural institution. Knock 'Em Dead Kid in 1977 and Thick as Thieves in 1978 solidified Trooper as Canada's definitive party band. When We're Here for a Good Time hit the airwaves, it wasn't just a song, it was a philosophy. In a decade marked by economic uncertainty and social upheaval, Trooper gave people permission to stop worrying for 3.5 minutes and just feel alive. But the song that would define them forever, the one that has followed them across 5 decades and 1,000 arenas, was released in July of 1978. Raise a Little Hell. It wasn't about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was about self-determination, standing up and righting the wrongs in your life rather than accepting them. Blue Collar Wisdom, set to a riff that could shake the walls of any venue from Vancouver to Schenectady. And in Schenectady, New York, it actually reached number 5 on the regional charts. It remains the only Trooper song to crack the US Billboard Hot 100, peaking at number 59, a modest chart position that in no way reflects the song's absolute cultural dominance north of the border. That song eventually surpassed 100,000 Canadian radio plays. It became a staple of sports broadcasts, movie soundtracks, and the shared memory of an entire generation. If you were alive in Canada in the late 1970s, that riff didn't just play on your radio. It played at your high school, in your first car, at the party you still remember today. By 1979, Trooper had transcended the category of successful Canadian rock band and entered the realm of genuine commercial phenomenon. Their greatest hits compilation, Hot Shots, achieved something almost incomprehensible in the context of Canada's population at the time. The album raced up the charts, eventually going multi-platinum in Canada. It eventually reached 6 times platinum certification, over 600,000 units sold in Canada. 1 in every 40 Canadians owned that record. Hot Shots became one of the best-selling Canadian rock compilations of its era, a fixture in collections across the country. In a country with a fraction of the American population, that saturation level is almost impossible to replicate. The tour schedule that accompanied this peak was relentless. More than 100 shows a year for nearly a decade. They shared bills with BTO, Thin Lizzy, and April Wine, and held their own on those stages every single night. The Pacific Coliseum in Vancouver, the Saddle Dome in Calgary, arena after arena, city after city. McGuire later described a sold-out show at the Pacific Coliseum as surreal. The only time in his career when he felt like he was living inside an Elvis movie, looking out at a packed stadium with his parents in the VIP box, barely able to process how far 2 kids from the Vancouver lounge circuit had actually come. While contemporaries like Rush were pushing into progressive experimentation and Heart was evolving toward harder art rock, Trooper made a conscious choice to stay exactly where their audience needed them. Blue-collar rock with a smile, dependable, energetic, unpretentious. Every night, they delivered exactly what they promised. That consistency was their greatest weapon. But success at that level carries hidden weight. McGuire later admitted that seeing platinum records mounted on the wall didn't feel like a reward. It felt like a threat. Each new certification raised the stakes. The machine that had lifted them to the top now demanded constant feeding, and the industry around them was beginning to shift in ways that no amount of hard work could fully overcome. The United States remained stubbornly out of reach. Despite the regional success of Raise a Little Hell, Trooper's deep association with Canadian identity, combined with the hard rock format's battle against the twin pressures of disco and punk, kept full American breakthrough just beyond their grasp. South of the border, they were a forgotten gem. In Canada, though, they were legends. And for a moment in the late 1970s, that was more than enough. Every generation that lived through the turn of the 1980s remembers the shift. One day the radio sounded like something familiar. Then, almost overnight, it didn't. New wave arrived with synthesizers and angular haircuts. MTV launched, and the visual presentation of a band suddenly mattered as much as the music itself. The neon-drenched artifice of the early 80s had little patience for the honest, straightforward rock that bands like Trooper had built their careers on. Trooper managed one final peak-era flourish with Flying Colors in 1979, a major hit album that produced Janine, their highest-charting Canadian single, at number 7. The machine was still running, but the fuel was running low, and then came the first departure that truly hurt. In late 1979, Frank Ludwig, the keyboardist who had helped define the platinum sound of Knock 'Em Dead Kid and Thick as Thieves, left the band. The departure wasn't accompanied by explosive scandal or bitter legal maneuvering. It was quieter and in some ways sadder than that. Fundamental conflicts over creative direction had made the situation untenable. Frank Ludwig went on to join Randy Bachman's new project, Iron Horse. The brotherhood was beginning to thin. The loss of Bachman as producer followed shortly after. By 1980, the mentor-proc relationship that had shepherded Trooper from the Royal Towers basement to the Pacific Coliseum had run its course. The band attempted to self-produce their 7th album, Untitled, but the record couldn't match the commercial velocity of the platinum years. By 1982, Money Talks, produced by Heart's Mike Flicker, came and went without the impact anyone had hoped for. The recording contract was gone. It wasn't personal, it was a cultural earthquake, and almost nobody was left standing exactly where they had been. For McGuire and Smith, the dream that had once felt limitless was now a daily negotiation with management problems, declining chart presence, and the growing absence of people they had once considered brothers. The party was still going, but the room was emptier than it had been. The mid-1980s demanded a humility that very few bands are willing to accept. After 5 years of relative inactivity on the recording front, McGuire and Smith returned to the road in 1987, not to arenas, but to small clubs. The same kinds of rooms they had started in 20 years earlier. But now, instead of building towards something, it felt like defending something. Original drummer Tommy Stewart was gone. Bass player Donnie Underhill was gone. The lineup that had created 6 platinum albums was becoming a memory rather than a functioning unit. McGuire described that era honestly. Being the 2 leftover Trooper guys wasn't empowering. But walking away from something they had spent their entire adult lives building wasn't an option they were willing to consider. The fragmentation happened slowly, the way most important things end. Not with a single dramatic rupture, but through a series of quiet departures, each one feeling survivable on its own. As members left and new musicians arrived, the central question of the Trooper story became increasingly unavoidable. What is a band without the people who created it? Philosophers call it the ship of Theseus paradox. Replace every plank of a ship one by one, is it still the same ship? For Trooper fans watching the lineup evolve through the 90s and into the 2000s, always with McGuire and Smith as the only consistent thread to the past, the answer felt deeply personal. The name was still on the marquee, but the connection was fractured. Unlike the bitter litigations that tore apart bands like Deep Purple or the legal disputes that complicated the legacy of the Guess Who, Trooper's fracture was emotional rather than legal. No courtrooms, no restraining orders, no public condemnations, just the quiet, steady erosion of a brotherhood that had once been able to finish each other's sentences. By the time musicians like Paul Gogo and Scott Brown became long-term fixtures in the lineup, Trooper had become an institution, and institutions outlive the people who create them. What never died was the draw. Even as the lineup evolved and the original members aged, Trooper remained a fixture on the Canadian festival circuit that few acts could claim. They performed at the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver, a massive national stage confirming their cultural staying power. They appeared at a Grey Cup in Edmonton. Year after year, they earned the Road Gold Award, an honor for bands that consistently draw significant crowds regardless of current chart activity. The machine kept moving. But the machine had changed its purpose. It was no longer about the next platinum record, no longer about cracking the American market. The mission had shifted from creation to preservation, honoring the music, delivering the songs, keeping the party alive for fans who had been showing up since the beginning. Then, on November 8th, 2021, the final chapter of the original Trooper story quietly closed. Ra McGuire and Brian Smith announced their retirement from performing. Both were in their early 70s. Both were described as healthy and happy. They had spent a year and a half off the road during the global travel disruptions that shuttered live music, and McGuire admitted with characteristic dry humor that they were getting pretty good at it. Nearly 55 years after a teenager from Vancouver and a kid from London first picked up instruments together on the lounge circuit, 55 years of vans and arena stages, basement clubs and platinum records, sold-out nights and empty rooms, they chose to stop. What happened next was surprising, and in its way, generous. McGuire and Smith gave their blessing for the remaining band members, none of them original, to continue performing under the Trooper name. The more recent touring lineup has featured Paul Gogo, Scott Brown, David Steele on vocals, and Steve Crane on guitar, carrying it forward. In 2023, Trooper was inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame, a recognition many felt was long overdue. 10 former and current members attended the ceremony, including Frank Ludwig, the keyboardist who had helped build the sound of those platinum years before departing in 1979. The brotherhood had fractured, but the music still had the power to bring people back to the same room. We're Here for a Good Time is called Canada's unofficial second national anthem, played at weddings, at wakes, at hockey games, at every gathering where people want to remind each other what it means to be alive in a specific moment. Raise a Little Hell keeps appearing in unexpected places. It showed up in the television series Stranger Things, a show watched by millions who weren't alive when the song was recorded in 1978. Each new appearance confirms what the original fans always knew: this music was built to last. Ra McGuire once described the name Trooper as a salute to the performer who keeps going even when the roof is falling in. Somewhere in that definition lives the whole story. The original Brotherhood is gone. The lineup has changed beyond recognition, but the songs keep performing. The music keeps showing up. And as long as that's true, the legacy of Trooper, whatever pieces it's been broken into, remains intact. Trooper never imploded in scandal or burned out in tragedy. They did what all things built by human hands do: changed, aged, and let go. But the songs carry the weight of everything they were. Raise a Little Hell, We're Here for a Good Time. Those aren't just tracks on an old record. They're proof that two bandmates who started out in Vancouver clubs once grabbed something real. What's your Trooper memory? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock and roll's past.